When I finished, I closed the safe, replaced the painting, and thanked Claire profusely. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm going to expose him, I said. But I need more evidence first, and I need to protect you. She shook her head. Don't worry about me. Just stop him. Please, Danny. Stop him before it's too late. I promised her I would. And I meant it. That night, I sat in my apartment with Sarah on a video call. The photographs of the trust documents spread across my screen. This is bad, Sarah said, her face grim. But it's also good. Good how? Because he's made mistakes. Look at these physicians' notes. They're all from the same doctor, dated months apart. But the language is almost identical. That's suspicious. Either this doctor is incredibly lazy, or these notes are fabricated. Can we prove that? We need to find Dr. Richard Vaughn and see if he actually examined your grandmother. If he didn't, or if he was paid to sign off on these notes without a proper evaluation, that's fraud. And it invalidates everything. Hope flickered in my chest. How do we find him? Sarah smiled. Leave that to me. I have resources. Over the next few weeks, Sarah dug into Dr. Richard Vaughn's background. What she found was disturbing, but not surprising. Vaughn was not a licensed physician in Connecticut. In fact, his medical license had been revoked 3 years earlier due to ethics violations. He had been caught selling prescriptions illegally and falsifying medical records for clients who paid him under the table. Marcos had hired a disgraced unlicensed doctor to certify that my grandmother was of sound mind. He had paid for fraudulent medical opinions to support his fraudulent trust amendments. It was all coming together. But we still needed one more piece. We needed to prove that Evelyn did not understand what she was signing. We needed to get her away from Marcus's influence and have her properly evaluated by a legitimate physician. That meant getting to her, and that meant being very, very careful. I started visiting Evelyn more frequently, always under the guise of a dutiful grandson who wanted to spend time with his ailing grandmother. Marcus could hardly object. It would look suspicious if he tried to keep me away, but I noticed that he always seemed to find reasons to be present during my visits. He would drop by unexpectedly, or Claire would appear with some excuse to interrupt our conversations. It was clear that he did not want me alone with her. I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment. That moment came 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was in New York for a business meeting. Claire had called in sick and was resting at home, and Evelyn's caregiver had stepped out to run errands. I drove to the estate and let myself in with the key that Evelyn had given me years ago. I found her in the sunroom, the same place where she had made me that promise so long ago. She was sitting in her chair, staring out at the gardens, her face peaceful but distant. Grandma, I said softly, kneeling beside her. She turned to look at me, and for a moment her eyes were clear, lucid, present. Danny, she said, her voice a whisper. My Danny. Grandma, I need to ask you something important, I said. Do you remember signing some papers recently? Papers about your trust? Her brow furrowed. Papers? Marcus brought me papers. He said they were routine. Something about taxes. My heart clenched. Did you read them before you signed? She shook her head slowly. He said it wasn't necessary. He said he would take care of everything. She paused, and her eyes grew troubled. Danny, I'm confused. Something is wrong, isn't it? I can feel it, but I can't quite grasp it. I took her hands in mine, fighting back tears. Yes, Grandma, I said. Something is wrong, but I'm going to fix it. I promise you. She squeezed my hands with surprising strength. I trust you, Danny. Your mother would be so proud of you. Those words hit me like a wave. My mother. The woman whose memory I was fighting to protect. The woman whose legacy Marcus was trying to erase. I won't let you down, I said. That day, I arranged for a legitimate geriatric psychiatrist, a colleague of Sarah's, to evaluate Evelyn. The evaluation was thorough and professional, and the results were exactly what I expected. Evelyn was suffering from moderate dementia. She had significant cognitive impairment that affected her ability to understand complex documents. She was easily influenced by authority figures and had diminished capacity to make informed financial decisions. In other words, She had no idea what she was signing when Marcus put those amendments in front of her. Armed with this evaluation, Sarah and I began preparing our case. But we were not the only ones preparing. Marcus was watching me. I could feel it. He had noticed my increased visits to Evelyn. He had seen me spending more time in the archive room at work. He had caught glimpses of my conversations with Sarah, and he was getting nervous. The first sign of his counterattack came in the form of a meeting request. He called me into his office one Friday afternoon, his smile as warm as ever, but his eyes cold. "Danny," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "we need to talk about your future at the company." My guard went up immediately, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course," I said. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," he said, leaning back in his chair. "In fact, I've been very impressed with your work. I think it's time for a promotion." I blinked. This was unexpected. "A promotion?" "Yes. I want you to take over our expansion into the Midwest. It would mean relocating to Chicago for a few years, but it's a tremendous opportunity. More responsibility, more money, a chance to really prove yourself." I understood immediately what he was doing. He was trying to get rid of me. He wanted me far away from Connecticut, far away from Evelyn, far away from whatever he was planning. I forced a smile. "That sounds amazing, Uncle Marcus. Can I have a few days to think it over?" "Of course," he said. "Take your time, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." As I left his office, I felt his eyes on my back, calculating, assessing. He knew something was up. He was testing me, and I had just failed his test. That night, I called Sarah in a panic. "He's on to me," I said. "He's trying to ship me off to Chicago to get me out of the way." Sarah was silent for a moment. "Then we need to move faster. We can't let him take control of the situation." "What do we do?" "We go public," she said. "We file a lawsuit challenging the trust amendments. We notify Adult Protective Services about potential elder abuse. We contact the district attorney's office about the fraudulent medical certifications. We hit him from every angle, all at once, before he has a chance to respond." It was a bold plan, a dangerous plan. Once we went public, there would be no turning back. Marcus would know exactly what I was doing, and he would fight back with everything he had. But I had no choice. If I waited any longer, he would find a way to neutralize me. "Let's do it," I said. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf, challenging the validity of the trust amendments and seeking their nullification. Adult Protective Services opened an investigation into Evelyn's care. The district attorney's office began looking into Dr. Richard Vaughn and the fraudulent medical certifications, and Marcus's world started to crumble. The first blow came when local news picked up the story. A reporter who had been digging into Harrison Development Group's finances stumbled upon our lawsuit and smelled blood in the water. Within days, Marcus was facing questions about his business practices, his treatment of his elderly mother, and his relationship with his nephew. He tried to control the narrative. He held a press conference, his voice steady, his smile confident, denying all allegations, and portraying me as a disgruntled relative who had invented lies to steal his inheritance. But the evidence was too strong. The fraudulent trust amendments, the unlicensed doctor, the financial irregularities at his company, the testimony of Claire, who had finally found the courage to speak out against him. One by one, the pillars of Marcus's empire began to fall. His business partners distanced themselves. His clients pulled their contracts. His employees started resigning. The banks that had lent him money began demanding repayment. And then the criminal charges came. Marcus was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. He was arrested in his office, in front of his remaining staff, and led out in handcuffs. I was not there to see it, but I heard about it, and I felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a deep, profound sadness. This was the man who had raised me, the man who had promised to protect me, the man I had loved like a father, and he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I testified on the first day, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. I told the court about my childhood, about losing my parents, about how Marcus had taken me in and become my world. I told them about overhearing the phone call, about discovering the fraudulent documents, about my grandmother's confusion and vulnerability. And then I told them about the moment I realized that the man I trusted most had been manipulating me for years. Marcus sat at the defendant's table throughout my testimony, his face a mask of composure, but I could see the rage simmering behind his eyes. He had underestimated me. He had thought I was too naive, too loyal, too grateful to ever suspect him. He had been wrong. Claire testified next. She broke down in tears as she described years of emotional abuse, of financial control, of living in fear of her husband's temper. She told the court about the documents I had photographed in his office, about the shell companies and the phantom projects, about the millions of dollars that had been funneled into Marcus's personal accounts. And then she said something that shocked everyone, including me. He told me once, late at night, that he had always resented his sister, Claire said, her voice trembling. He said she was the favorite, the one their mother loved most. He said that when she died, he felt relief, and then anger, because even dead, she still had something he didn't. Danny. The courtroom went silent. Marcus's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it. The world had heard it. My mother's death had not just been a tragedy for me. It had been an opportunity for Marcus, an opportunity to finally take what he believed was rightfully his. The prosecution presented the fraudulent trust amendments, the fake medical certifications, the financial records from Harrison Development Group. Expert witnesses testified about my grandmother's mental state, about the impossibility of her understanding what she was signing, about the systematic exploitation she had suffered. And Dr. Richard Vaughn, the disgraced doctor who had signed the fraudulent certifications, was brought in to testify as well. Faced with potential criminal charges of his own, he had agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. He admitted everything. Marcus had paid him $50,000 to sign off on certifications, claiming that Evelyn was of sound mind. Vaughn had never actually examined her. He had never even met her. He had simply signed whatever documents Marcus had put in front of him. By the time the prosecution rested, Marcus's case was in ruins. His defense tried to paint me as the real villain, a greedy nephew who had concocted an elaborate scheme to steal his inheritance. They pointed to my access to the company archives, my conversations with Sarah, my secret visits to my grandmother. But the jury was not buying it. They could see the evidence. They could see the truth. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to the estate, including the return of all properties and assets he had fraudulently transferred to his name. As the bailiffs led him out of the courtroom, Marcus turned and looked at me. For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw the hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he mouthed. But it was over. At least, the legal battle was. In the months that followed, I worked with Sarah and a team of attorneys to restore my grandmother's estate. The fraudulent trust amendments were nullified. The properties were returned to the family trust. The shell companies were dissolved, and the money was recovered. Evelyn passed away peacefully 6 months after the trial, surrounded by family and caregivers who truly loved her. In her final days, she seemed to regain some clarity. She recognized me when I visited. She held my hand and smiled. "Your mother would be so proud," she said again, just as she had months before. And this time, I believed her. I inherited half of Evelyn's estate, just as she had promised. The other half went to a charitable foundation she had established in my mother's name, supporting scholarships for orphaned children. It was more money than I had ever imagined. Enough to secure my future. Enough to start my own business. Enough to help others who had suffered as I had. But it was not the money that mattered. What mattered was that justice had been served. What mattered was that my mother's legacy had been protected. What mattered was that I had stood up to the man who had betrayed me and won. Claire divorced Marcus while he was in prison. She took nothing from him, wanting only to sever all ties to the man who had controlled her for so long. I helped her get back on her feet, finding her a small apartment and connecting her with a therapist who specialized in survivors of emotional abuse. She thanked me with tears in her eyes. "You saved me," she said. "I spent 20 years in that prison, and you set me free." I shook my head. "You saved yourself, Claire. You had the courage to speak out when it mattered. I just gave you the opportunity." Sarah and I grew closer through the ordeal. What had started as a professional relationship had evolved into a deep friendship, and eventually, something more. We started dating about a year after the trial, and I proposed on the anniversary of the day she had first agreed to help me. She said yes. We got married in a small ceremony at Evelyn's estate, the same sunroom where my grandmother had made me that promise so long ago. It felt right. It felt like closing a circle. As for Harrison Development Group, it was dissolved entirely. The remaining assets were liquidated to pay off debts and fund the restitution Marcus owed. Many of the employees found work elsewhere, and a few even reached out to thank me for exposing the truth. We always knew something was wrong, one of them said, but we were too afraid to say anything. You had the courage we didn't. I do not know if I agree with that assessment. I do not feel courageous. I felt desperate, cornered, and terrified most of the time. But I also knew that doing nothing was not an option. I could not stand by and watch the man who raised me destroy everything my family had built. Marcus served 7 years of his 12-year sentence before being released on parole. I received notification of his release through my attorney, along with a warning to be vigilant. I was not afraid. The first time I saw him after his release was at a coffee shop in Greenwich. He was sitting alone at a table by the window, looking older, smaller, defeated. Prison had not been kind to him. He saw me enter, and our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he looked away. I walked past his table without stopping. There was nothing left to say. He had taken everything from me once, my trust, my family, my sense of security. But I had taken it all back, and more. I had built a life that he could never touch. As I left the coffee shop, I realized that I did not hate him anymore. I pitied him. He had spent his entire life chasing wealth and power, betraying everyone who loved him, and in the end, he had lost it all. I, on the other hand, had found something far more valuable. I had found the truth. I had found justice. I had found love. And I had found myself. There are moments still when I think about the little boy standing in that hospital corridor, clutching his stuffed bear, watching his world fall apart. I think about the years of confusion and grief, the desperate need to belong, the willingness to trust anyone who offered a shred of comfort. That little boy made mistakes. He trusted too easily. He overlooked too much. He wanted so badly to believe that the people who claimed to love him actually did. But that little boy also survived. He grew up. He learned. He fought. And he won. I am not the same person I was before all of this happened. I am harder in some ways, more cautious, less willing to take people at face value. But I am also stronger, more resilient, more aware of my own worth. Marcus Harrison was supposed to be my protector. He was supposed to be my family. Instead, he became the greatest enemy I have ever faced. But in the end, he did not destroy me. He revealed me. He showed me what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. He forced me to become the person I needed to be. And for that, in a strange way, I almost thank him. Almost. Now, as I sit in my office overlooking the Boston skyline, running the investment firm I built from the ground up, I often think about what I would say if I could go back in time and talk to that 8-year-old boy in the hospital corridor. I would tell him that the road ahead is going to be harder than he can possibly imagine, that the people he trusts most will sometimes hurt him the deepest, that the world is not always fair, and justice does not always come easily. But I would also tell him to hold on, to keep fighting, to never give up, no matter how dark things get. Because in the end, the truth always comes out. The lies always unravel. And the people who try to destroy you will ultimately destroy themselves. My name is Daniel Harrison. My uncle tried to take everything from me, my inheritance, my legacy, my very identity. But I took it all back, and I am still standing. If you're going through something similar, if someone you love is betraying you, manipulating you, trying to steal what is rightfully yours, I want you to know that you are not alone. I want you to know that there are people who will help you, who will believe you, who will fight alongside you. Do not give up. Do not let them win. The truth is a powerful weapon, and it is always on your side. Gather your evidence. Build your case. Surround yourself with people you can trust. And when the time is right, strike. Because karma is real. Justice is real. And the consequences of betrayal are inescapable. Marcus Harrison learned that the hard way, and so will anyone else who tries to destroy the people who trust them. This is my story, this is my confession, and this is my message to the world. Betrayal can break you, but it does not have to define you. You can rise, you can fight, you can win. I did, and so can you. Every year, on the anniversary of my grandmother's death, I visit her grave. I bring flowers, usually lilies, her favorite. I sit on the grass beside her headstone and I talk to her, just like I used to when she was alive. I tell her about my life, about Sarah, about our daughter, who we named Eleanor after my mother, about the business and the charity work and all the good that has come from the fortune she left behind. And I thank her for believing in me, for making me that promise all those years ago, for giving me something worth fighting for. You were right, Grandma, I say. Mom would be proud. And I know, deep in my heart, that they both are. The last time I saw Marcus was 2 years after his release. He was standing on a street corner in downtown Greenwich, looking lost and confused. He had aged dramatically. His clothes were worn. His hair had gone completely white. I learned later that his life after prison had been a series of failures. No one would hire him. No one would trust him. The reputation he had spent decades building was gone, and in its place was only shame. He ended up in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, living on Social Security and the occasional odd job. Claire told me, through a mutual acquaintance, that he had reached out to her once, asking for help. She had refused. He made his choices, she said. Now he has to live with them. I do not know what happened to him after that. I stopped keeping track. He was no longer a threat. He was no longer even a presence in my life. He was just a ghost, a reminder of what happens when greed and jealousy consume a person's soul. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if things could have been different, if Marcus had been a different person, if he had truly loved me as a nephew instead of seeing me as an obstacle, if he had shared the inheritance fairly instead of trying to steal it all. We could have been family, real family. We could have built something together, honored my grandmother's legacy, carried on my mother's memory. But that is not what happened, and I cannot change the past. What I can do is learn from it. I can be the kind of person that Marcus never was. Honest, compassionate, trustworthy. I can raise my daughter to value integrity over wealth, relationships over power, love over greed. I can break the cycle. And that is exactly what I intend to do. My daughter is 5 years old now, with her grandmother's eyes and her mother's smile. She does not know the full story of what happened with Marcus. She is too young to understand. But one day, when she is older, I will tell her. I will tell her about her great-grandmother, who loved her family more than anything, about her grandmother, whose memory lives on in every scholarship we fund, about the uncle who betrayed us and the consequences he faced. And I will tell her about me, about the choices I made, about the fights I fought, about the lessons I learned. I will tell her that family is not just about blood. It is about trust. It is about loyalty. It is about showing up for the people you love, even when it is hard, even when it costs you something. And I will tell her that if anyone ever tries to take advantage of her, ever tries to manipulate or deceive her, she has the strength to fight back. Because she comes from a long line of fighters. She comes from me. The story of my best uncle turning into my worst enemy is not a happy story. It is full of pain and betrayal and broken trust. It is full of moments that I wish had never happened, revelations that I wish I had never had to face. But it is also a story of survival, of resilience, of the power of truth to overcome lies, and of justice to prevail over greed. Marcus Harrison took so much from me. My innocence, my faith in the people I loved, my sense of security. But he could not take my spirit. He could not take my determination. And he could not take the memory of my mother, which I carry with me every single day. In the end, that is what saved me. The knowledge that I was fighting for something bigger than money or property or revenge. I was fighting for her, for my grandmother, for my future children and grandchildren. I was fighting for my family. And I won. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you for listening, for letting me share this story with you, for understanding that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But I also want to leave you with hope. Because no matter what you are going through, no matter how dark things seem, there is always a way forward. There is always a chance for justice, for truth, for redemption. You just have to be brave enough to fight for it. And I promise you, it is worth it. Every single moment of pain, every sleepless night, every tear I shed was worth it. Because I am free now. Free from Marcus's shadow. Free from the lies and manipulation. Free to live my life on my own terms, with the people I love, doing the things that matter. That is my victory. That is my revenge. Not prison sentences, or financial ruin, or public humiliation. Freedom. And there is no sweeter revenge than that. So thank you, again, for listening. Thank you for being part of my story. And if you ever find yourself facing your own betrayal, remember this. The truth always wins. Karma always comes. And you are stronger than you know. My name is Daniel Harrison. My best uncle became my worst enemy, and I survived. I never thought I would be telling this story. Even now, as the words form in my mind, there is a part of me that cannot believe any of it happened. But it did. Every single moment of it. And I need you to hear it from the beginning, because I need you to understand what it feels like to have the one person you trusted most in this world turn into the very person who tried to destroy you. My name is Daniel Harrison, and this is the story of how my best uncle became my worst enemy. I want you to picture a little boy, 8 years old, standing in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. His shoes are untied. His shirt is inside out because no one helped him get dressed. He is holding a stuffed bear that smells like his mother's perfume, and he is watching 2 police officers speak to a nurse in hushed voices. That little boy was me, and in that moment, my entire world had just collapsed. My parents died in a car accident on the interstate just outside of Boston. A drunk driver crossed the median and hit them head on. They died on impact, which the doctors told me was a mercy. But there was no mercy for me. Not that night. Not for a very long time afterward. I had no siblings. My father was an only child. My mother had one brother, a man named Marcus Harrison, who I had only met a handful of times at family gatherings. But that night, when the social workers started making phone calls, Marcus was the one who answered. Marcus was the one who drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to come get me. And Marcus was the one who knelt down in front of me in that cold hospital corridor, put his hands on my shoulders and said, "I've got you now, Danny. I've got you. You're going to be okay." I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. Marcus was my mother's younger brother by 3 years. He had done well for himself. He owned a successful real estate development company in Connecticut, lived in a beautiful home in Greenwich, and drove cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He had a wife named Claire, a quiet woman with kind eyes who always seemed slightly nervous, though I never understood why back then. They had no children of their own, which Marcus always said was a choice they had made together, though I noticed Claire's eyes would go sad whenever the topic came up. For the first few years after my parents died, Marcus was everything to me. He was the father figure I desperately needed. He taught me how to throw a football. He helped me with my homework. He took me to baseball games and bought me ice cream and told me stories about my mother when she was young. He made me feel like I still had a family, like I still belonged somewhere. But there was something else that came with Marcus. Something I was too young to understand at the time, but would come to realize was at the center of everything that happened later. My grandmother, Evelyn Harrison. Evelyn was my mother's mother, and she was, to put it simply, wealthy. Extremely wealthy. Her late husband, my grandfather, had been a real estate developer himself, one of the pioneers of commercial property development on the East Coast during the 1960s and 70s. When he passed away in the early 90s, he left Evelyn with an estate worth well over $40 million, along with properties, investments, and a trust that would continue to grow for decades. Evelyn lived in a sprawling estate in Darien, Connecticut, just 15 minutes from Marcus's home. She was elegant, sharp-minded, and fiercely protective of her family. After my parents died, she became my second pillar of support. While Marcus provided the day-to-day structure, Evelyn provided the love, the wisdom, and the sense of legacy. She would sit with me for hours, showing me old photographs, telling me about my mother's childhood, making me feel connected to a history that I thought I had lost. And she made me a promise. I remember the day clearly. I was 12 years old, sitting in her sunroom overlooking her gardens. She took my hand in hers, her skin paper thin, but her grip still strong, and she said, Daniel, when I am gone, everything I have will be divided between you and Marcus. Your mother's share was always meant to go to her children. You are her only child. Half of this estate belongs to you by right and by love. I did not fully understand what that meant at the time. Money meant very little to me then. I just wanted my mom back. But Evelyn wanted me to know that I would always be taken care of, that I would never have to struggle, that my future was secure. What I did not know was that Marcus was standing just outside the doorway, listening to every word. And what I certainly did not know was that those words ignited something dark inside him, something that would grow and fester for the next 16 years until it consumed everything. Let me tell you about the Marcus I knew for most of my life. He was charismatic. He could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. He had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when he was talking to you. He remembered birthdays, anniversaries, small details that other people forgot. He gave generous gifts and offered help before you even asked for it. Everyone who knew Marcus adored him. His business partners trusted him. His neighbors respected him. His employees were loyal to him, and I worshipped him. He was more than an uncle to me. He was my hero. When other kids talked about their fathers, I talked about Marcus. When I needed advice, I went to Marcus. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, it was Marcus sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. When I got into Columbia University on a partial scholarship, it was Marcus who wrote the check for the rest of my tuition without hesitation. I loved him. I trusted him completely. And that trust is what made everything that came later hurt so much more. The first crack appeared when I was 22 years old, in my senior year at Columbia. I was studying business, following in the footsteps of Marcus and my grandfather, preparing to enter the world of real estate development. Marcus had promised me a position at his company after graduation, a chance to learn the trade from the ground up. I was excited. I was grateful. I thought my future was set. But then something strange happened. I came home for Thanksgiving that year, and I noticed that Evelyn seemed different. She was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. She had always been sharp, always engaged in conversation, always asking questions about my life and my studies. But that Thanksgiving, she barely spoke at dinner. She picked at her food. She excused herself early and went to bed. I asked Marcus about it later that night when we were sitting in his study drinking brandy, a tradition we had started when I turned 21. Is Grandma okay? I asked. Marcus sighed and swirled his glass. She's getting older, Danny. It happens to all of us eventually. The mind starts to slow down. The doctors think it might be early dementia. My heart sank. Evelyn had always been so sharp, so vibrant. The idea of her losing her mind was devastating. Is there anything we can do? I asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. We just have to be patient with her, support her, make sure she's comfortable. He paused and looked at me with what I thought was genuine concern. I've been spending more time with her lately, helping her manage her affairs. She gets confused sometimes, forgets things. I don't want anyone to take advantage of her. I nodded, grateful that Marcus was stepping up. Thank you for taking care of her, I said. He smiled and patted my shoulder. That's what family does. I had no reason to doubt him, not then, but looking back now, I can see that this was the moment when everything started to shift. This was the moment when Marcus began laying the groundwork for what he would later do. After graduation, I moved back to Connecticut and started working at Marcus's company, Harrison Development Group. I was given an entry-level position, which I expected. Marcus said he wanted me to learn the business from the bottom up, to understand every aspect of the operation before moving into leadership. I respected that. I worked hard. I arrived early and stayed late. I took on every project, every assignment, every task with enthusiasm. But I started to notice things. Small things at first. Marcus would have meetings that I was not invited to, even when they concerned projects I was working on. Files would disappear from my desk and reappear days later with sections removed. Colleagues would stop talking when I entered the room, then resume their conversations with forced smiles. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was new. I had not earned the trust of the team yet. I needed to prove myself. Then, about 6 months into my job, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I was working late one night, The only person left in the office except for Marcus, who was in his corner office with the door closed. I needed a file from the archive room, which was adjacent to his office. As I walked past his door, I heard him on the phone, his voice low but intense. I understand the timeline, he was saying, but we need to move faster. She's not going to last much longer, and I need everything in place before that happens. I froze. My heart started pounding. The amendments to the trust are already done, Marcus continued. She signed them last month. She didn't even read them. She just signed whatever I put in front of her. There was a pause, and then Marcus laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was cold, calculating. Danny? He's not a problem. He doesn't know anything. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. The money will be transferred, the properties will be in my name, and there's nothing he can do about it. Legally, I'll own everything. My blood turned to ice. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to breathe. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just heard. This could not be real. This could not be happening. Marcus would never do this. He loved me. He had raised me. He had promised to protect me. But the words I had heard were unmistakable. He was stealing from my grandmother. He was manipulating her, using her declining mental state to change her trust, to redirect her fortune away from me and into his own pockets. And he thought I was too stupid to notice. I do not know how long I stood there. It might have been seconds. It might have been minutes. But eventually, I forced myself to move. I crept away from his door, abandoned the file I had been looking for, grabbed my jacket, and left the building. I drove home in a daze. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I kept replaying his words in my head, trying to find some alternative explanation, some innocent interpretation that would make this all go away. But there was none. The man who had raised me, the man I had loved like a father, the man I had trusted with my entire future, was systematically stealing my inheritance. He was exploiting my dying grandmother. He was betraying everything our family stood for. And he was doing it with a smile on his face. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind churning through every interaction I had ever had with Marcus, looking for signs I had missed, red flags I had ignored. And I found them. I remembered the way he had insisted on being the one to manage Evelyn's affairs, the way he had discouraged me from spending too much time alone with her, always saying she needed her rest or she was having a bad day. The way he had slowly isolated her from other family members, from friends, from anyone who might notice what he was doing. I remembered the expensive renovations he had done on his house 2 years ago, right around the time Evelyn's health had started to decline. The new cars, the vacation home in the Hamptons. At the time, I had assumed these were the fruits of his successful business. Now I realized they were funded by something far more sinister. I remembered Claire, his wife, and the nervous way she always looked at him, like she was afraid of something. Did she know? Was she complicit? Or was she another victim of his manipulation? And I remembered my grandmother's words to me all those years ago, her promise that half of her estate would be mine, that my mother's legacy would be passed on to me. That promise had meant everything to me, not because of the money, but because it was a connection to my mother, a way of honoring her memory, a sign that I was still part of a family even after losing the two people who had brought me into this world. Marcus was trying to steal that from me. He was trying to erase my mother's legacy, to pretend I did not exist, to take everything for himself. And I was not going to let him. The next few weeks were the most difficult of my life. I had to go to work every day and pretend that nothing had changed. I had to smile at Marcus, sit in meetings with him, accept his praise for my work, all while knowing that he was actively trying to destroy me. But I was watching, and I was learning. I started paying closer attention to everything that happened at Harrison Development Group. I noticed that certain accounts did not add up. I saw invoices for projects that did not seem to exist. I observed Marcus meeting with lawyers and accountants in private, always behind closed doors, always with the shades drawn. I knew I could not confront him directly. He was too smart, too connected, too powerful. If I accused him without evidence, he would simply deny everything and find a way to discredit me. Worse, he might accelerate his plan, move the money faster, make it even more impossible for me to recover anything. No, I needed to be strategic. I needed to gather evidence. I needed to build a case that was so airtight, so undeniable, that he would have no way to escape. And I needed help. That is when I reached out to Sarah Mitchell. Sarah and I had known each other since childhood. She had grown up in the same neighborhood, attended the same schools, and even gone to Columbia the same years I did, though we had drifted apart after graduation. She had gone to law school while I had entered the business world, and now she was working as an associate at a prestigious firm in Manhattan that specialized in estate law and financial fraud. If anyone could help me understand what Marcus was doing and how to stop him, it was Sarah. I called her on a Friday evening, my voice carefully controlled despite the chaos in my mind. Danny? She said when she answered. Oh my God, it's been forever. How are you? I need your help, I said without preamble. Something bad is happening, Sarah. Something really bad. And I don't know who else to turn to. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had shifted from casual to serious. Tell me everything, she said. And I did. I told her about the conversation I had overheard. I told her about the changes I had noticed in my grandmother, the isolation, the confusion. I told her about the suspicious activities at Marcus's company, the unexplained expenses, the secret meetings. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Danny, she finally said, if what you're saying is true, this is not just theft. This is elder abuse. This is fraud. This is potentially a criminal conspiracy. I know, I said. That's why I need your help. She took a deep breath. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, you need to get access to your grandmother's trust documents, the current version, and any amendments that have been made in the past few years. Second, you need to document everything you observe at the company, dates, times, names, anything that seems suspicious. Third, you need to find a way to talk to your grandmother alone without Marcus present, to assess her mental state and see if she understands what she signed. And if she doesn't understand, I asked, if she's really as far gone as Marcus claims, then we have grounds to challenge the amendments, Sarah said. If she lacked the mental capacity to understand what she was signing, those documents are void. But we'll need medical evidence to support that. We'll need doctors who can testify about her condition. It sounded overwhelming. It sounded impossible. But for the first time since I had overheard that phone call, I felt a flicker of hope. I can do this, I said. I have to do this. You're not alone, Danny, Sarah said. I'm with you. We're going to figure this out together. Over the next few months, I became two different people. At work, I was the dutiful nephew, the eager employee, the grateful protege who hung on Marcus's every word. I smiled. I nodded. I agreed with everything he said. But in private, I was building a case. I started by accessing the archives at Harrison Development Group. It was easy enough to do without raising suspicion. I was supposed to be learning the business after all, and that meant familiarizing myself with old projects, old contracts, old financial records. No one questioned why I was spending hours in the file room. What I found was shocking. Marcus had been siphoning money from the company for years. He had created shell corporations, fake vendors, phantom projects that existed only on paper. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had flowed out of Harrison Development Group and into accounts that I traced back to Marcus's personal holdings. But that was just the beginning. I also discovered that Marcus had been borrowing against the company's assets to fund his lifestyle. The beautiful house, the luxury cars, the vacation home in the Hamptons, none of it was paid for. It was all leveraged, all financed, all built on a foundation of debt and deceit. Harrison Development Group was not the thriving success that Marcus presented to the world. It was a house of cards, one bad quarter away from collapse. And that is when I understood why he was so desperate to get his hands on Evelyn's money. He needed it, not just to enrich himself, but to stay afloat. Without an infusion of cash, his entire empire would crumble. My grandmother's fortune was not just a bonus to him, it was a lifeline. Getting access to Evelyn's trust documents was harder. Marcus kept them in a safe in his home office, a room I had rarely entered. But Claire, his wife, had always been kind to me. She remembered my birthday. She asked about my well-being. And lately, I had noticed her watching Marcus with an expression I could not quite read. Suspicion, maybe, or fear. I decided to take a risk. One Sunday afternoon, when Marcus was out playing golf with his business associates, I stopped by the house under the pretense of picking up some files I had left there. Claire answered the door, looking tired and worn. "Danny?" she said, surprised. "Marcus isn't here?" "I know," I said. "Actually, Claire, I was hoping to talk to you." Her expression shifted. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or relief. "Come in," she said quietly. We sat in the living room, and I decided to be direct. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you know what Marcus is doing to my grandmother?" She went pale. Her hands started trembling. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Yes, you do," I said gently. "I've seen the signs. I've heard things. I know he's been changing her trust, redirecting her money. I know he's been manipulating her." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her hands, wringing them in her lap. "I wanted to tell someone," she whispered. "I wanted to stop him, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of him." She looked up at me, her face a mask of anguish. "Danny, you don't know what he's capable of. He's not the man everyone thinks he is. He has a temper, a terrible temper. He controls everything, the money, the accounts, even what I'm allowed to say. If I tried to leave, if I tried to expose him, he would destroy me." My heart broke for her. All these years, I had assumed Claire was happy, that she was living a charmed life with a successful husband. But she was as much a prisoner as my grandmother. "Claire," I said, reaching out to take her hand, "I'm going to stop him. But I need your help." She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. "What do you need?" she asked. "The trust documents, the ones in his safe. I need copies." She hesitated. I could see the war playing out on her face, the terror of defying Marcus battling against the desire to finally do something right. Finally, she nodded. "Tomorrow," she said. "He has a lunch meeting. He'll be gone for at least 3 hours. Come then." I thanked her, my heart pounding with a mix of gratitude and anxiety. This was a dangerous game I was playing. If Marcus found out, there was no telling what he would do. But I had no choice. I had to see those documents. I had to know the full extent of what he had done. The next day, I arrived at Marcus's house precisely at noon. Claire was waiting for me, her face pale but determined. She led me to his office, a grand room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. The safe was behind a painting, a cliché that almost made me laugh despite the gravity of the situation. "The combination," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my birthday. He thinks he's being sentimental, but really, he just wants to remind me that he owns me." I entered the combination, and the safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, folders, and envelopes. I started photographing everything with my phone, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. And then I found them. The trust amendments. There were 3 of them, each dated within the past 2 years, each bearing my grandmother's signature. But as I read through them, my blood ran cold. The first amendment removed me as a beneficiary entirely. According to this document, Evelyn had decided that I was not mature enough to handle a large inheritance and had chosen to leave her entire estate to Marcus. The second amendment gave Marcus immediate access to a portion of the trust's assets, supposedly to help him manage her affairs during her declining health. The third amendment was the most damning. It transferred ownership of several properties, including the family estate in Darien, directly to Marcus's name. By the time these amendments were fully executed, my grandmother would own nothing, and neither would I. But there was something else, something that made my stomach turn. Attached to each amendment was a physician's note, certifying that Evelyn was of sound mind and capable of making her own decisions. The notes were all signed by the same doctor, a man named Dr. Richard Vaughn. I did not recognize the name, but I photographed everything anyway.